quantitative tightening and increases in interest rates, but then being forced in this position of having to offer further liquidity. Just a couple of other things I'd say about the situation the UK got in. I don't think it was just the decisions to cut taxes. It was the sort of the run-up to that so-called mini-budget on September the 23rd. And I think this is really important in terms of lessons for others as well. Economic institutions are incredibly important, and undermining those institutions that give investors confidence is very dangerous. So in the run-up to that mini-budget, we had a leadership contest in the Conservative Party, a governing party, over the summer, where there was undermining of the central bank, of the Bank of England. You then had the new Chancellor coming in, and the UK had 4 Chancellors last year. But the new Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng, came in September, and one of his first acts was to sack the respected Permanent Secretary at the Treasury. And then with that mini-budget on the 23rd of September, when you should have had a forecast both for the economy and for government finances from the Office for Budget Responsibility, that wasn't allowed to be published, even though it was available, which just gave this impression that the government had something to hide and wasn't operating within the frameworks that had existed in the UK in terms of the Bank of England since 1998 and in terms of the Office of Budget Responsibility since 2010. And those things combined with the huge unfunded nature of the tax cuts got, you know, we're not a low-income country, we're not a middle-income country, we're in the G7, and we got into huge difficulties. And I think that is a lesson for any country that wants to embark on those sorts of policies without explaining. And I'd say, as how I started, not the bond vigilantes' fault. Investors looked at the UK, and the governor of the Bank of England said last week, Andrew Bailey said last week, that there's still a hangover effect from what happened in September, with question marks being put over the UK as a place to invest. Now, look, I'm the opposition party. I want to turn that around, maybe come on to a bit of that, but that's what happened to the UK in September.
Indeed, I mean, I think the markets, that was, I was trying to be a bit more diplomatic, but, you know, the Shadow Chancellor here, I think, you know, you said it as you think it, but, you know, clearly the markets punished the government. There's no, and if I could just to push you a little bit more, because of course, markets recovered, but, you know, the UK economy is still lagging, you know, and worries about growth are leading a lot of investors to limit their holdings. This is both of the pound and of British debt. And so, you know, can you give us a sense of how your government, your party, if in government, would fix things?
So the first thing, and the lesson from September, is that any economic policy has to be built on a rock of economic and fiscal responsibility, and that has to come before anything else. But it's also obvious, and you make this point, that the UK needs a serious plan for economic growth, because in productivity and in growth terms, and numbers that were published today about foreign direct investment shows that the UK has been missing out the last decade or so compared to our nearest neighbours and our competitors as well. And look, the reason that Keir Starmer, the leader of the opposition in the UK, and myself are here this week is to send a message that, you know, at the next election, at the moment, Labour have a strong lead in the opinion polls, that the British economy will be open for business again, that we want to work with business and partner with business to get that growth and productivity back in the UK economy. You know, part of that is sorting out some of the mess of the Brexit deal of a couple of years ago, which has seen our exports fall and jobs move abroad in many cases. It's the Green Prosperity Plan that Keir and I have been setting out, because the UK has got every reason to think that we could be leaders in some of these industries of the future, our great universities, our industrial heritage, our geography. But at the moment, we're falling behind both the US and, of course, the announcement this week by Ursula von der Leyen to the EU as well, when it comes to supporting investment in those green industries of the future. But an incoming Labour government wants to work in partnership with business to secure the investment, the jobs that is needed to turn around the poor economic performance not just since the Brexit vote in 2016, but really now for just over a decade.
Okay, so that's why the Labour Party, you are here in Davos as part of that effort.
That's why we are here, because somebody has got to be an ambassador for Britain, and the Prime Minister and Chancellor of my country are not here. Labour hope to form the next government, and so we think it's really important to be here talking to business and investors about our plans for the future.
Thank you, Professor Rogoff. Let's talk about quantitative tightening just a little bit and how it fits in this equation, and the impact that it'll have this year. Central banks obviously have had a huge presence over the past year in the world's biggest bond markets, and basically tightening policy at the same time that bond sales were rising. And all of this is adding to sort of upward pressure on borrowing costs. What does this all add up to debt sustainability? What are the vulnerabilities here?
Let me start by seconding, you made many important points, but one in particular about central bank independence. And I think whatever was true 40 years ago, in this day and age, undermining central bank independence is suicide. That's been an incredibly effective device for giving confidence in so many ways, not just with the inflation rate, but I'd almost say with institutional integrity. And it's, I think it's a mistake to try to attack central banks. And Turkey has fired more central bank ministers. Well, maybe the same number as chancellors. It's
not a competition we want to be in, really.
No, so quantitative tightening is particularly significant in the Eurozone. So if I can talk about that, where the quantitative easing had a very important element where the European Central Bank is the most important Euro-wide institution, or it was at one time, and it has the fiscal capacity to do big things quickly. And I think it did a lot to prop up periphery southern country debt during the crisis. But it sold it on the idea that we're fighting deflation and we have to raise prices. And I don't think they really thought that, but it sold that way. So it's very hard in this other direction where interest rates are going up, and Italy's interest rates seem to go up, more than proportionally to how much Germany's interest rates go up. And it's clear that if you just pulled the rug out from under this, Italy's rates would go up a lot more. And I think the ECB's done a very good job in trying the communications of this tightrope, but it's very hard. So they say they have another way of doing it, and we'll see. But I think elsewhere it's not such a big deal, except in Japan, where they did a much more extreme policy, where many of you may know they fixed not just the policy rate as the Fed does and many other central banks, they fixed the 10-year rate. Now that worked when interest rates seemed like they really ought to be negative in Japan, and so people accepted it. But now that there's upward pressure on real rates, which I already mentioned, and inflation everywhere, even Japan, that really is hard for them to back out of.
It's been in the news just over the past few days a lot what's been happening in Japan. I wanted to come back to China because you had mentioned it just in your remarks before. So I think in December, China, which of course is the largest sovereign debt creditor, agreed with the IMF to participate in a global sovereign debt roundtable, about debt release, other solutions. What role does China play then in everything we've been talking about? What should they do? What should China take up sort of the mantle to do?
Well, I think we need to keep this in a perspective. We are in a transition period where, we were in a paradigm that you deal with the Paris Club, the traditional creditors, the multilateral creditors, and this has now been changing. So also in the previous workout, non-Paris Club creditors didn't play a significant role. Now they are playing a very significant role, and that is, I think, the challenge to bring these creditors into this process of dialogue. And it is not only China. India is an important creditor, Saudi Arabia, some of the Arab states, in this country, and they need all to be in there. And this has been challenging. And I think that was also a fundamental idea of the common framework of how you think differently of this. And in the last, I would say, 2 years, we have seen limitations of the common framework. The common framework is actually extremely important to bring everybody around, but it has been also very difficult and challenging to get them to the agreements that are necessary, and also on a timely basis. So at the 6+1, this is a meeting that the Prime Minister of China, Li Keqiang, does with 6 international organizations, including the IMF and the World Bank. We agreed to have this roundtable that is co-chaired by the IMF, the World Bank, and then the G20 presidency. So that is in this year India. And we will start at the deputies level, the first discussion next month at the G20 meeting in India, and then probably in April or May and with the finance ministers. And really it is about fostering the dialogue, first of all, what needs to be done, and then actually see how we can help these countries work out. Because it's very clear, that take also a case of Sri Lanka. The problem is that there is not that workout right now. And the country desperately needs a lot of financing, and that is not assured. So that is why it is urgent. I would actually say one last reflection, maybe also with the common framework, as I had done the HIPC initiative with the IMF. What we did in the mid-90s was come up with a framework what that sustainability means. And you can criticize whether there's NPV debt to exports or the debt service ratios were all the right ones, but it was a very clear spelled out process that you use first, the Paris Club process, you exhausted, it's not necessary, we need to do additional things. Right now, we have negotiation where there is not an established debt sustainability framework. So what you see in the discussions in the that different creditors are challenging all the underlying assumptions, or is this really sustainable? Take the case of Chad. Now, of course, then, are you looking at that sustainability today, or are you projected it in the future? How long in the future? And this has been very complicated. In addition, we need to think about that in many of these frameworks earlier, we were only looking at external debt, and domestic debt has also become important. So this is a very overdue discussion that will need to be held. I hope also that you get first on the political things, that we need to tackle those countries that are in desperate need for treatment. And then we also, in parallel, start having this discussion of a much, much clearer framework against which we then can define the level of debt relief.
I mean, just all of you, I mean, is there a compelling case for a major new round of debt relief? I don't know if anybody.
No, for institutions. Can I talk about that?
Absolutely. And then I have a question on, another question for you. But is there a compelling case?
I think you need to go case by case.
Yeah. Well, no, the situation is case by case in any case. But the lack of institutions for debt renegotiations is a major institutional problem in the world economy. I mean, all the solutions have been ad hoc. The Brady Plan, the debt relief for poor countries, now this common framework, they are ad hoc. We do need an institution, a permanent way of managing these issues.
So an international debt fund, debt organization.
Yeah, no, well, it could be the IMF, as it was tried in the early part of the century. It could be the IMF, it could be the United Nations institution, but we need an institutional framework where these issues can be handled. And of course, I mean, the issue of the let's say the levels of debt and when they are risky, let's say, which is the good work that done by the World Bank and the IMF, is of course was a step forward. But again, that should be a framework for something else that is missing in the world institution. Let me stop that for the time being. But
good, because I want to ask you something else, which is several countries in Latin America have, including Colombia and Argentina, Ecuador, have proposed debt swaps in order to meet climate goals. And your government has as well. And basically under this scheme, developing countries basically get their debts canceled or reduced in exchange for sort of commitments that they will then finance green projects. And I think you have suggested it for the Amazon. Can you give us an update on how that is proceeding?
Well, let me separate the issue of debt relief and the restructuring from debt for
of course,
debt for
they're two
nature
different, but it's an
swaps.
interesting, absolutely, but it is
The
an
debt for
interesting.
nature swaps or debt for climate swaps was an institution of the climate change negotiation, not of the debt issue.
Okay.
And I think it makes all sense, it major sense to enhance significantly. And this, by the way, has to do with one basic fact is that if you want to point out one major issue of inequality in the world is the contribution to climate change. It's all the responsibility of major responsibilities from developed countries. So developed countries should actually support in a significant way, the climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation, which is a major problem. And the debt for nature, debt for climate swaps is one mechanism among many others that should be part of that solution, together with the $100 million that were promised as a contribution for the debt restructuring for climate change mitigation in developing countries, which has not been met. I think that's but I don't think don't mix them.
Okay.
Don't mix them. I think we're talking about debt in more general, not for debt for nature swaps, which is a climate change.
But it's a topic here, so it's an interesting proposal. So that's why I wanted to see where you were with that.
No. Many countries have used it in the past, including Colombia, and it should be more widely used. In any case, for example, for our country, it's a small thing relative to our debt. It's very small, but it can be a major contribution to our fight against climate change.
Professor Rogoff wanted to jump in.
Well, two quick things. First, you asked the question about HIPC initiative. That's when the debts were written down. And there is a big problem today with the presence of China as a creditor. It just has to be a part of it. If China doesn't want it, then it can't happen. I don't want to get into it here, but I'm all in favor of giving developing economies aid. I have a proposal for World Carbon Bank to channel technical expertise and funds to developing economies to take up another time. But debt for nature swaps, I don't favor. I think actually they sound much better on paper than if you look at them closely. Each case is different, but it was the front page of Time, the cover of Time magazine in 1988. And it was, I think, by and large, they're giveaways to the creditors.
Yes. Minister, did you want to rebut that?
No, it's a good point. I mean, when they do...
This is where the economist in you and the minister in you sort of...
No, when they do give you money for climate change mitigation or adaptation, it is a useful instrument. For example, let's take now this major South American initiative, which is to preserve the Amazon, which is, I guess, the largest remaining jungle in the world, which is a major source of climate change mitigation. So I think it's a world responsibility to support the Amazon. So it's not a South American initiative. And if the mechanism, I mean, if they want to do donations straight, fine, that would be
You'll
great.
take them.
I will probably, we'll celebrate, but that
if I
that
could
for
just do
nature,
one,
that for nature, that for climate,
if I
it's
could
equally
Would you
good.
swap that like 10% of the Amazon in Colombia, that is done by a foreign country?
No. Don't. I will not give a centimeter of the Amazon to any foreign country. I mean, for sure. No, what
I've opened up a whole can of Amazonian worms here. Goodness gracious.
No. But I mean, let's put it this way: the deforestation, which is a major problem of the Amazon, and is the major contribution of Latin America, certainly of my country, to climate change, is an objective that should be promoted. And then how that is financed is an important issue.
Professor Rogoff, then I want to go to Gettr Chancellor and 5 minutes for questions.
Super quick, but
yeah.
Giving money to Colombia to preserve the Amazon, great idea. Debt for nature swaps. The problem is that the debt that doesn't get taken away gets bid up in value. That's been the problem. So you're giving money to all the people who didn't swap their debt.
Transfers are better, yes.
Okay, all right. The minister will be outside accepting donations after this panel. Gettr Chancellor, since I was going to use another example like NHS or education or whatever, but I'll use climate energy transition, which is what are the implications, right, of a debt mountain, for pressing priorities that any government has, that your government would have, including for energy transition projects?
Yeah, well, look, I think that investors can see the difference between unfunded tax cuts and investment in infrastructure that yields a long-term return. And but obviously, what happened in September in the UK does make it harder to make that case. But the UK, like other countries around the world, have to play their part. And it's all well and good preaching and lecturing other countries what they must do around the world, but we've got to get our own house in order. And of course, to meet the climate emergency, which is a moral obligation, but also in the UK because it is the way to grow the economy. The jobs of the future in those industries, carbon capture, green hydrogen, etc., that is where future jobs and prosperity is going to come from. But what you're seeing in countries around the world that are taking this seriously is through a partnership with government and business. But the other thing I would say, this is just not just about money. Every business that I speak to who wants to invest says you've got to sort out the planning, you've got to sort out the regulation, you've got to sort out the grid connections. The role of government isn't just to provide money, it's also to provide the framework, the long-term stability to encourage that investment. But I think that investors and everyone can see the difference between short-term sugar rush plans for growth and the long-term investment that is needed to kickstart industries and the economy.
Great. Okay, we have about 5 minutes for questions. Please.
Hello, Hiro Nishimura from Japan's Nikkei. Professor Rogoff, you mentioned Japan several times, so I must ask this. So should Bank of Japan abandon its yield curve control policy? And what will happen if it does abandon its policy? And is Japan's high public debt level adding or feeling upward pressure on interest rates? Or will that happen? Thank you.
Try to make a careful answer to this to not cause a crash in the yen. So it makes sense to try to, at this point, to try to keep it going as long as you can, because the exit's not going to be pretty if there does have to be a dramatic exit. As far as Japan's debt, which is 260% of GDP, about half of which is basically one-day debt, I mean, I think it's manageable. It sounds infinite, but I think it's manageable. There may be some inflation, but the problem is when your debt's that high, you don't necessarily have a lot of fiscal space, we heard that earlier, to deal with anything else. So if a problem arose because there's a UK type pension, the pension type problem buried somewhere in the financial system that nobody knew, then there's less resources to wrap around that. That's really the risk of having such a high debt. But you know, the saying Japanese interest rates would go up is famously called the widowmaker trade. So I'm aware of that.
Minister, did you want to add anything on this? You said you want to talk about the.
No.
You were not going to talk about this, are you? Okay, yes, please.
Let's say South African Reserve Bank. I think to the World Bank. I mean, in the resolution of this debt, how do you think the private sector debt, particularly domestic debt, should be handled? Because there are complications that would tend to be held by pension funds and insurance companies. And my hunch is that you can't discriminate against the foreign holders of that debt. And what have you seen? What do you think should be done?
Let's get this question as well, so then we can answer and close. Yes. Please.
Fernando Ghosh, Council on Energy, Environment and Water, and member of the UN Committee for Development Policy and an advisor to the Indian G20 presidency. A quick question about climate-related macroeconomic shocks that are only going to grow over the years. Now, even if a country, of a low-income or middle-income country, were being responsible with their debt, this is an externally imposed constraint. It's not just a fiscal constraint. It just completely messes up their macroeconomic situation. What would Professor Rogoff or Jose Antonio Campo recommend as a way to create an insurance cushion for that kind of vulnerability?
Great. Well, first to you for the first question, and then you can both jump in on the second.
Well, on the first question, I think that we are seeing that there is not an agreed framework of a debt workout that involves equally the domestic debt and the external debt. And what we are seeing is that there are huge sensitivities, particularly when you have incipient pension funds. I think what is being tried, and that is usually with the IMF programs, that one tries to have an orderly workout in the domestic one. But the domestic debt, we need also to say there can be central banks, there can be institutional investors. There is also with business. So one needs to see what is the type of debt, and particularly when local business has to accept a huge haircut, what that actually means for the local economy. So those things will need all to be evaluated. On the external debt, I think there are the collection action clauses that need more use, but also I think, quite frankly, that we have to say within a framework how you can enforce action, and this has to be debated. What you saw with the DSSI, the debt service suspension initiative, it was all voluntary, and that voluntary participation didn't work well. And so one needs to discuss how we want in the future to have those kind of workouts. But just to concretely take in the Zambia case, but also this is going to come up in Sri Lanka. If all these debtors don't want to act on this, we need to have a serious discussion about the lending of arrears by multilateral institutions. And we have been now doing that now for some times in Zambia, and we're very loud on this. Zambia will need critical financing, but I would then say, run arrears.
Okay, we need to quickly, because we need to close. Minister, and then.
No, on this issue, certainly, actually in the most recent international, discussions on the issue of, let's say, climate change crisis, I think this issue of well, I mean, there are all issues like, for example, the Caribbean, which has already been subject to a lot of risk associated, to hurricanes. That's one issue. But more recently, the issue of a specific, climate crisis, floods, for example, like Pakistan last year, or even my country, which has a significant flood associated to climate change. I think the world economy should create an instrument, a kind of insurance mechanism for those cases, which more or less was a point in the negotiations in the climate change in Egypt, in the COP. So I think there has to be created, but I think it's a parallel mechanism, not necessarily associated. It's actually to be able to fund the cost of of managing those specific crises. So it's more as an insurance mechanism that the world had lacks today. I think different from debt as such.
And last word.
I mean, I think there are places that are going to become very difficult to live because you can't get insurance. That's already true in parts of the United States. And for small island states, there's nowhere to move. And it's a huge problem. And I'm not sure that any amount of money really is going to solve that. There are going to need to be adjustments. And that's part of climate change, all these places that people suddenly have to move. And as Al Gore has said, having all the climate refugees, that's just a piece of it.
Shadow Chancellor, I didn't give you a last word. Did you have a 5-second last remark?
I mean, even in the UK, we are seeing the impact of climate change with much more flooding, including my own constituency, which we'd never seen before. And obviously the problems in some of the developing parts of the world are even greater. And we have to come together as a global community to address these challenges.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you very much to the panelists. Sorry for running a few minutes over. And thank you to everyone for listening.
This time, our discussions revolved around the global economy's path out of the pandemic. At the start of 2022, many people were expecting a boom, or at least a substantial boost for our economy's transition toward climate neutrality. Then came February 24. Since then, Russia has been waging an imperialist war of aggression here on our doorstep in Europe, with dreadful consequences that Ukrainians are bearing more than anyone. Just today, the Secretary of the Interior and 15 other victims were killed in a tragic helicopter crash. We are with their families. But the war is also having an impact on all of us. For a while, energy prices jumped to levels higher than we had ever seen before. Around the world, production costs and consumer prices exploded. Many people fear that coal and oil will make a lasting comeback all across the world. If that were to happen, the 1.5-degree target would become meaningless. Our supply chains must be adapted to new geopolitical realities. Realities that you called a messy patchwork of powers in your speech yesterday, Klaus. And over all of this hangs a sword of Damocles, the danger of a new fragmentation of the world, of deglobalization and decoupling. And yet, ladies and gentlemen, this is just one part of the story of last year, just one part of the reality that we are looking at here in Davos. The other part of the story is this. Russia has already failed completely in reaching its imperialist goals. Ukraine is defending itself with great success and impressive courage. A broad international alliance led by the G7 is providing the country with financial, economic, humanitarian and military support. Germany alone made available over 12 billion euro last year, and we will continue to support Ukraine for as long as necessary. In Berlin at the end of October, we worked with international experts to draw up a Marshall Plan for the long-term reconstruction of Ukraine. A platform of major donors is coordinating the process and, in consultation with Ukraine, ensuring that it is well implemented. Private sector capital will play a key role here. I know that many companies in Germany and beyond are very aware of the opportunities that the Ukrainian economic miracle could offer to them, particularly as the country moves toward the European Union after the end of the war. But in order for the war to end, Russia's aggression must fail. That is why we are continuously supplying Ukraine with large quantities of arms in close consultation with our partners. This includes air defense systems like Iris-T or Patriot, artillery, and armored infantry fighting vehicles, marking a profound turning point in German foreign and security policy. And there's another part to the story of last year. Within a few months, Germany made itself completely independent from Russian gas, Russian oil, and Russian coal. We concluded new partnerships in Asia, Africa, and America, thus lessening our dependence. And so I can say that our energy supply for this winter is secure. Thanks to well-filled storage facilities, thanks to improved energy efficiency, thanks to remarkable solidarity within Europe, and thanks to the readiness of our companies and of millions of citizens to save energy. As a result, energy prices have recently seen a huge stop and drop. Our measures to reduce the burden on private citizens, companies, and businesses are working. Inflation is falling slowly, thanks incidentally also to resolute moves by the central banks. Industrial production in Germany has remained stable over the past few months against all the odds. Our employment rate is at record levels and has recently increased even further. Most importantly, our transformation toward a climate-neutral economy, the fundamental task of our century, is currently taking on an entirely new dynamic. Not in spite of, but because of the Russian war and the resulting pressure on us Europeans to change. Whether you are a business leader or a climate activist, a security policy specialist or an investor, it is now crystal clear to each and every one of us that the future belongs solely to renewables. For cost reasons, for environmental reasons, for security reasons, and because in the long run, renewables promise the best returns. So yes, the past year brought fundamental change for Germany and Europe. But Germany itself has fundamentally changed as well. We are resolutely pushing forward with the decarbonization of our industry. We want to be climate neutral by 2045, and at the same time, we will remain a country with a strong manufacturing sector. And despite all the difficulties this past year showed us, we can and we will succeed in that. In less than 7 months, we built up an entirely new import infrastructure for LNG in Wilhelmshaven. In the future, it can also be used for hydrogen. Just last Saturday, I opened our second LNG terminal within just a few weeks in Lubmin. The day after tomorrow, another terminal ship is expected to arrive at the port of Brunsbüttel. More will follow. This is not only good news for our energy security and that of our European neighbors who will be receiving gas from these terminals. Above all, it shows Germany can be flexible, we can be unbureaucratic, and we can be fast. I spoke of a new Deutschlandgeschwindigkeit, in this regard, a new German speed. We will make this German speed the benchmark, also for the transformation of the economy as a whole. Your companies can hold on us to this standard. A new law mandates that the expansion of wind power, solar energy, as well as electricity and hydrogen networks now take priority. We will make available no less than 2% of our country for wind power with a minimum of red tape. We have streamlined our processes so that approvals for electricity grids, to name just one example, are granted on average 2 years faster than before. And we intend to step up the pace even more. You can also rely on our targets. The obstacles have been swept aside. For 2023, we have more than doubled the volume of calls for tender for onshore wind farms alone. By the year 2030, 80% of our electricity production will come from renewable sources, again, double what it is at present. At the same time, our electricity requirements are increasing from 600 terawatt hours today to 750 by the end of the decade. And we are expecting them to double yet again in the 2030s. This is a massive increase. That is why the Federal Network Agency has been given a clear mandate to prepare and expand our electricity grids accordingly. We will regularly review the progress made. If it's not on schedule, the measures will be adjusted. However, electricity alone is not enough to run Germany's industry. I'm thinking, for instance, of steel production. Hydrogen will play a decisive role there. And that is not a far-off scenario. Last fall, ThyssenKrupp gave the green light to build a direct reduction plant for low-carbon premium steel. With a capacity of 2.5 million metric tons, the plant will save 3.5 million metric tons of CO2 per year. This is just one example of Europe's strength in innovation. Europe is the world's #1 in hydrogen patents, and 1 in 10 global applications comes from Germany. The first supply chains for green hydrogen are currently being built up in our country. For our own production, we are using offshore wind in the North Sea. In parallel, we are concluding hydrogen partnerships worldwide. For as long as quantities are small and the costs of production correspondingly high, the state will bring prices down to a level lucrative for the industry. Our goal is nothing less than an electrolysis boom. And as quantities increase, a hydrogen-powered industrial sector will emerge that preserves the climate and is independent of volatile prices for fossil fuels. Because one thing is absolutely certain: energy must remain affordable in Germany, in Europe, and worldwide. In Germany, we decided to cap electricity and gas prices for private citizens and companies. These measures will run until 2024. Annually, we will use around 2.2% of our GDP for this, a total of up to 200 billion euro. That is both forceful and proportionate. It will give your companies the reliable energy prices and the planning certainty you need to invest in Germany's transformation. In the European Union, we have agreed on joint targets for gas filling and saving. We will purchase gas jointly more often and coordinate storage better. And we will use our market power to ensure that European prices do not decouple completely from the world market. Moreover, we are also aware of our global responsibility. Let me say this expressly to our friends and partners in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. The fact that we Europeans purchase LNG on the world market must not lead to scarcity elsewhere. We will need alternatives for the roughly 120 billion cubic meters of gas from Russian pipelines missing from the world market. More renewables, of course, but also temporarily additional gas resources. Otherwise, there is a danger that without affordable gas, emerging economies in particular might switch back to coal. This would be even more harmful to the environment. Of course, we must avoid new lock-ins, new path dependencies at all costs by making new projects HO2 ready from the very outset and by expanding renewables in parallel. In the short term, this may lead to higher costs. However, in the long term, we all stand to save if the impact of climate change is less dramatic. In Germany too, switching to a climate-friendly economy will take efforts. We are talking about investments around 400 billion euro for the expansion of renewables between now and 2030. Investments, by the way, which are already well underway. The most recent example is a contract worth billions for Siemens Energy to connect a new offshore wind park to the grid. And this is just one example illustrating why this turning point towards a climate-friendly industry is not the end of our industrial powerhouse, but a new start. After all, even before the energy crisis that Russia triggered, Germany's business model was not only based on the energy-intensive mass production of aluminium, cement, or crude steel, but on highly specialized research and technology-intensive industrial products that are needed all around the world. All the more so, actually, when the world is now transitioning towards a climate-neutral future. Even before Russia's war of aggression, Germany's energy prices were not the lowest. And yet Germany was and remains competitive. This is because of thousands of small and medium-sized enterprises all across the country. Enterprises that are highly innovative and adaptable, which explains why they are so often global leaders. This is thanks to high public and private investment in research and development, which, for example, ensured that the first COVID-19 test and the first safe and effective COVID-19 vaccine were developed in Germany. Just in December, a team at the Helmholtz Center in Berlin set a new world record for the efficiency of solar cells. And now, just a few weeks later, our companies are already setting up pilot lines for the use of these tandem cells. That, ladies and gentlemen, is and remains the German business model, particularly now as we chart our path to a climate-neutral future. Where else is there such broad consensus between businesses, employees, and politics that the path to climate neutrality is not just ecologically necessary, but also offers new opportunities in global competition? When it comes to basic and professional training for employees, for example, politics, business, and trade unions in Germany are working hand in hand. And before the year is out, our country will finally benefit from modern immigration legislation. After all, if we want to remain competitive as a leading industrial nation, we need experienced practitioners, qualified engineers, tradesmen, and mechanics. Those who want to roll up their sleeves are welcome in Germany. That is our message. For decades now, the forecasts have been predicting a shrinking German population. But it is up to us to decide whether this happens. So far, it certainly hasn't. Today, Germany has more inhabitants and employed persons than ever before. And this is precisely the trend we are going to continue. Ladies and gentlemen, a climate-neutral future is, needless to say, not something any single country can achieve on its own. That is why our dialogue and a forum like Davos are so crucial. What we are doing in Germany also serves the goal of making Europe the first climate-neutral continent by 2050. At the European level, we are going to lower our net greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030 compared to 1990. This decision stands. Here, we are relying on the market, on competition, and on innovation. The EU's emission trading system is a case in point. Even today, we are using it to cut permissible emission levels in a way that is predictable for all. At the same time, this system is serving as a catalyst for innovation. But to ensure the most ambitious are not disadvantaged, we around the carbon border adjustment mechanism in Europe. At the same time, however, Europe remains open for international trade. I'm doing my utmost to ensure that the free trade agreements we have successfully negotiated with Canada, Korea, Japan, New Zealand, and Chile will soon be followed by new ones with Mercosur, India, and Indonesia. And we are also open to discuss a tariff agreement for the industrial sector with the United States. Though these agreements, we are creating a level playing field, and we are preventing high-emission industries from heading off to countries with less ambitious climate targets. This is also the aim of the International Climate Club we launched during Germany's G7 presidency. A secretariat has recently been set up at the OECD and the International Energy Agency. So the club is now open to new ambitious members. In the United States, this ambition has a name: the Inflation Reduction Act. Some $370 billion have been earmarked for energy and climate change mitigation over the next 10 years. I very much welcome this investment. Through the German Climate and Transformation Fund, we have made almost 180 billion euro available ourselves for the period of 2023 to 2026. But local content requirements for certain products must not result in discrimination against European businesses. Protectionism hinders competition and innovation and is detrimental to climate change mitigation. We, as EU members, are talking to our American friends about this. And at the same time, we are looking at what we ourselves can do to further improve investment conditions here in Europe. The CHIPS Act, for instance, has brought about a new start for chip manufacturing in Europe. Investors are starting new production plants for billions of euros. They can build on an existing semiconductor industry. This could become a model for other key technologies, particularly in the digital and climate sectors. And the funding is there for the taking. To date, only 20% of the more than 700 billion euro in the European Recovery Fund has been paid out. Its full impact will thus emerge over the coming years. To remain competitive, we will have to make European legislation on state aid more agile and flexible, just as European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has proposed and reaffirmed here yesterday. So that investors know in advance what support to expect and don't have to wait until years after their investment to find out. Ladies and gentlemen, the past year challenged us as seldom before. Yet, at the same time, we changed and moved things forward as seldom before. Germany itself is changing. If I may make a prediction.
Attitude gave me this support at that moment. So, you know, I know how I can make situation in Belarus better, and all those women on my path are helping me. They're encouraging me, and I know that, you know, women in politics are kinder than men.
Thank you so much. Arantxa, we've talked about solidarity. We've talked about male leaders stepping up and supporting women. We've talked about role models, women supporting women, and purpose. Purpose-driven leadership being core of what women are often, women's leadership is often known for. What else would you add to that list of how we get more women into positions of power?
Yeah, I think we've been told that this will happen organically, right? That women would go to university, that they first would go to school. Let's not forget, girls in many places are not allowed to go to school. So we would have girls going to school, then girls would go to university, then they will enter into the professional workforce, and they will make the way up to the top organically. So now we know this is not true. And therefore we need a much more deterministic approach, a tougher approach where we set goals where we put objectives. And if this is not voluntary, then it will have to be compulsory. But we will have to be much tougher at ensuring this dream of parity becomes a reality. Now, we will also have to be tougher about these places where, for reasons that have nothing to do with religion, with anthropology, with politics, women and girls are excluded from the very basics, starting with the school. And I have to say that on this one, it's good to be compassionate, it's good to complain, but in my view, we need to do a little bit more. We should not accept this is about girls whose future is curtailed by not being able to go to school. There is no religion in the world that would want that. There is no anthropological explanation. There is no political excuse. So all I'm saying, Sadia, I guess, is that we have to be a little bit more activistic. And for that, my sense is that this conversation cannot just be with women leaders, that it has to be with men and women seated around the table, because at the end of the day, what we want is a society that is more solid.
I was
come back to
counting
you?
men. How many men are here?
Can I come back to you for one other quick question? Quotas?
You know, I was educated in a family, I mean, my mother, my grandmothers, I mean, they treated me exactly like my brother. So in our family, there was no difference. And therefore, I thought that this business of being a feminist and, you know, pushing for women's rights was maybe not necessary. But then I went into the workforce. Then I became part I started to work, and I saw this with my own eyes. And I realized that there were very often cases where I would be the only woman in the room for no reason, because there were very smart women outside the room, but they were just simply not invited. So, yeah.
Yes, quotas.
You know, you have to, if it's not going to happen organically, then yes, we need quotas. You know, I faced this conversation when I became foreign minister of Spain. I look at my list of ambassadors, and for no good reason, I had lots of great women diplomats, very few women ambassadors. And even less so in positions of, let's say, systemic importance to our country, for no good reason. So yeah, you set the quota. Yes, you fix objectives, and yes, you measure it, and yes, you make sure that this is respected, and you report on that.
Thank you. You talked about your family and how you grew up, and Massi, can I turn it over to you on that aspect of things? What inspired you? Who inspired you?
Oh my God. Yeah, that's a very difficult question for me, because I grew up in a country with the educational system told me from the beginning, from the age of 7, that you're second class. So through all the TV and media, I was told that I'm gonna be hanged by my hair if I don't cover them. So I'm gonna make sure that I didn't have any role model through educational system, TV, media, but I had a tiny mother in the village who's not even able to read and write. She told me that, I mean, I grew up in a very poor family. We didn't have inside bathroom. We had to use outhouse, which during the night, it was really dark. And I remember my mom used to tell me that if you're scared of the darkness can swallow you all, can devour you. But instead of being scared of the darkness, just open your eyes, stare into the darkness. Then the darkness will disappear. That's how I learned to defeat the darkness. As a woman who grew up, you know, in the Middle East, I experienced a lot of darkness, like women of Afghanistan, women of Iran, women of Iraq, women of Syria. We live and breathe with darkness. So this is how I learned. My mom inspired me to defeat the darkness by opening my eyes. And now you see that Iranian women are doing the same in the streets. They're opening their eyes. They're going toward morality police. They're walking unarmed toward security forces. What the police do this to them, I want to actually show you. This is the picture of my women in my country. Police shot them in their eyes. Many women and men got blinded just because of asking for dignity and democracy. And these are the Rosa Parks of Iran. These are the women of suffrages and trying to tell the rest of the world, yes, if you talk about solidarity, you talk about determination, we have to have tough skin as well, because otherwise you're gonna get kicked out from everywhere. You know, we're being labeled of you're the agent of CIA, you're the agent of MI6, you're the agent of Mossad. But we, the women of the Middle East, we have agency, and we have to be tough, we have to be determined, and we have to fight every single day to take, you know, our share, our space back from the dictators.
Thank you. Governor, the same question to you. Who inspired you?
I'm very fortunate that I grew up in a household with a lot of bold women, and but I'll give credit to my father. It was my dad who was the one who pushed me and encouraged me, and when I doubted myself, it's the one that gave me confidence. And that's why I think, to your point, we need to have men sitting up here during these conversations. We need to have men who are working to eliminate the barriers that stand between female applicants and job opportunities, because we will do this, continue to do this work, but until we have equity and power, we will struggle. And that's why it is going to be important that not every young female is fortunate enough to have a dad like I did, someone who created some opportunities for me. And that's why it's on all of us to be a part of the solution. And we all benefit when we do. The things that women tackle, the way that we work together, the seats that we create for others at the table, that's what improves the quality of people's lives, the bottom lines of businesses, and creates real opportunity.
Thank you. Svetlana, your inspiration.
You know, now I can name thousands of names who are inspiring me, because I think that every Belarusian person who dared to challenge regime in our country is inspiring me. The first person, it was my husband, who started to oppose the regime, started to go from city to city asking people about their life. And when he declared that he wants to participate in presidential elections, he was immediately detained. Then when I, instead of my husband, ran for presidency, I was joined by two wonderful women, Masha Kolesnikova, Veronika Tsepkala, and all my presidential campaign we went through together. You know, after uprising in 2020, after fraudulent elections, a lot of people had to flee Belarus because of repressions. And Masha Kolesnikova, she also wanted to send out by KGB, and she tore her passport on the border not to let these people send her out of the country. Now she is in prison. She was in prison for 11 years in jail. And every day I see a sign of like little heroism in Belarusian people. All those who are sacrificing their freedom, who are sacrificing their lives, their families, their comfort life to give us opportunity to continue this fight against dictatorship, they are my heroes, my inspiration. And, you know, I know that there are millions of people in Belarus who continue their fight. So I have at least 9 million signs of inspiration for me.
Thank you. With the series of shocks and crises that have unfolded, the poly crisis that we're currently in the midst of, do we still even need a case for women in leadership? Don't we know that we have to do things differently? This is to any of you who'd like to start with that.
We know we have to do things differently, but maybe we need a bit more prodding And it doesn't have to be a separate part of a global conversation. You know, it doesn't have to be a conversation about geopolitics and chips and minerals and then about women. It has to be across. That's the way we will make it work. It has to be embedded as an integral part of a more solid economy, of a more solid company, of a more solid organization, of a more solid government, of a more solid institution. So I would plead for putting this as an across, not just the box that we take, that we've discussed women or women in leadership.
Governor? I agree. I think that's spot on. Svetlana? Massey, would you like to?
Nothing to add. I totally agree. I mean, the whole world know this. I mean, I just love the argument that you made, and I keep watching here that we need more men to join us, especially right now that Iranian men, they are like example, that they're getting executed just because of supporting their sisters. So we need more men to sit with us and do something in practice.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes left, and I'd like to make sure that we talk a little bit about the future. We've talked about some of the challenges. We've talked about some of the pathways. What gives each of you hope for the future? And how fast do you think we can get to parity building off of that hope? Massey, could you start?
Sorry, can I?
Svetlana, would you like to take that question?
You know, I'm absolutely sure that, so as we are talking about women today, that women are much stronger than we sometimes think about ourselves. You know, I can speak on myself personally. You know, I'm just tell my private story a little bit. You know, when I have an older son with special needs. And, you know, for 10 years, I rehabilitated my son, not knowing what is waiting us ahead. I didn't see the light in the end of the tunnel, but I knew that I have to work with my son every single day. You know, not depending, do I have a headache or I have other problems, but, and the situation in Belarus now is the same, and I feel the same. I don't know when we will get rid of the regime, when our thousands of political prisoners will be released, when we change our country for democracy. But I know that I have to work every day to reach this goal. So I know what it is to be strong. I know that strong women around me. I know that strong women in big politics who understand me as well. So I see hope in unity and in unity of women, first of all.
Thank you. Hope in unity. Arantxa?
Well, I have to say that I feel very humbled, frankly speaking, listening to women, strong women like Svetlana and Massey. I feel very, very humbled. And this is, I have to tell you, something that gives me a lot of hope and a lot of courage. But bringing it a little bit closer to home, I'm the Dean of a School of International Affairs, and what gives me hope is the students, the younger generation, the determination they have. They don't even ask why. They just say, what are we going to do and how can we change it? And that gives me enormous hope. And I make sure that they listen to stories like the ones that Svetlana and Massey have to share, because this is also what I'm sure will inspire them as much as it inspires me.
Thank you very much. Governor, your source of hope.
I'll tell you, a precursor to January 6th in the United States played out in Michigan. About 9 months before January 6th, we saw our capital inundated with people with weapons, making threats, hanging me in effigy. It was scary, and we saw it culminate in January 6th in our nation's capital. And in the United States, a midterm election, the party that is in the White House is historically a bad time for everyone else who's in that party when they are up for election in the middle of that term of the person in the White House. All of that being said, despite all of the anxiety and anger and division and politicization and social media and misinformation, we had a midterm election in Michigan where I won re-election. My Attorney General, who also is a woman, won re-election. My Secretary of State, who is also a woman, won re-election. My Lieutenant Governor, who is the first African-American Lieutenant Governor in Michigan history, also won re-election. And we passed a constitutional amendment to protect reproductive rights in the state of Michigan. And we flipped both our House and Senate. And I share that because we now have the first Black Speaker of the House in Michigan history and the first woman Senate Majority Leader in the state of Michigan. And I share that because despite all the history that would tell you that could never happen and all of the challenge that we've had to navigate, the people spoke with their votes, and we're now have an opportunity to lead for 4 more years. And that gives me hope that despite the misinformation and the anger and, you know, how ugly politics has become, when the people are engaged and their voices count, you see real representation, and that gives me hope, and I hope that gives some of you hope as well.
Thank you. And Masih, final word on hope to you and to the women of Iran.
Guys, as you see, I'm terribly sick. I'm very sorry about that, but I didn't want to cancel this. I wanted to come here because I'm hopeful, you know, and I see hope in unity. And I want to actually invite the whole world to show your unity, solidarity with women of Iran and Afghanistan. I think the time has come for the whole world to see women's march for women of Iran and Afghanistan. Sarina was only 17-year-old. She got killed by the police in Iran. Nika was only 16-year-old. And there are teenagers in Iran and Afghanistan. They are looking to us. So when I see unity, I mean in practice, we have to get together. Look at from China to Russia, Venezuela, Iran. All the dictators are more united than us who cares about equality, feminism, dignity, freedom. And that scares me, you know? My life is being upside down because the Iranian government sent someone to kill me in New York, to kidnap me on US soil. I don't care about my life, but when I see that women of Iran are being killed and getting raped and women of Afghanistan being kicked out from school, but still we are not united, that scares me. And this is the unique time I hope we can get together and ask the leaders of democratic country to isolate Taliban and Khamenei and their gang of killers. Otherwise, believe me, we're not gonna win. We're not gonna have freedom around the world if women of Iran and Afghanistan are not free. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Governor Whitmer. Thank you, Arantxa. Thank you, Svetlana, and thank you, Masih. Thank you for your leadership and providing us with this inspiration today. Thank you, everyone.
We take a look at what's happening behind the scenes. A Gravitas special report on US veteran suicides and the need for their mental health care. At your workplace, the computer is not your companion. Your colleagues are your companions. We tell you what studies say and why workplace friendships are important. The 24th of February, 2022. This date is etched in the memory of every Ukrainian. It was on this day when Russian tanks rolled across the border, aiming not only at the eastern parts, but also at the Ukrainian capital, sparking an instant response from America and Europe. What followed was a show of their unity against the Russian aggression. They imposed sanctions and punished oligarchs close to the Russian president. They shut down communications with Russia, welcomed Ukrainian refugees, and armed Kiev to fight Moscow. Throughout 2022, they also went on a diplomatic offensive to ring-fence Russia. But nearly 11 months on, is this Western bravado starting to wane? Has war fatigue started to set in? Is the NATO becoming war-weary, or is it now starting to believe that the price of continued escalation might become unacceptable? Or perish the thought, is there some silent calculation that Ukraine's President Zelensky not heeding hints that some compromise should be sought? I ask these questions tonight because the leaders who promised to help Ukraine, who made grand pledges of helping Zelensky for as long as it takes, now seem to be in two minds. I am not the one saying this. Western leaders themselves are saying this. And one of them is this man, the Prime Minister of Poland. He says the West is becoming tired of the Ukraine situation. Exact words spoken. He said this in an interview to a Polish state broadcaster. Let me quote, "A few months ago, the discussions were on a different emotional level and the interest was different. The West, the free world, is a little tired and would like to live a normal life. Today, I see this very clearly, and I want to warn world leaders because Russia is patient and looks to tighten its grip on Ukraine in the long term." And this statement is both intriguing and rare in its honesty. The question is, what made the Polish Prime Minister say this really? Is there a growing collective fatigue in the West? Or was he referring to someone in particular? We don't know yet, but recently, one European country has on multiple occasions admitted that restraint should be the new watchword. I'm talking about Germany. For the last 1 week now, Germany has repeatedly stressed that it does not want to be drawn further into this war, that it's not in a position to send more tanks to Ukraine. It dropped the first hint on Wednesday. This was at the Davos summit. A reporter asked the German chancellor why his country was hesitant about supplying tanks to Ukraine. Do you know what Olaf Scholz said in response? He put the onus on others, the likes of America and France. Let me quote his response for you. "We are never doing something just by ourselves, but together with others, especially the US, which are very important in this common task to defend the Ukrainian independence and sovereignty. We are working together with them. We are discussing with them." And barely hours after this statement was made, Scholz made another remark. This one was even more striking. He said he does not want the war in Ukraine to become a war between Russia and the NATO. And today, the 19th of January, this report emerged. It said Berlin has set conditions for the United States on exports of German tanks to Ukraine. It says it will send the tanks so long as the US agrees to do the same. What is all this about? You see, Ukraine recently asked the West for more heavy battle tanks, around 300 of them. It says this will help them regain momentum on the battlefield. Poland and Finland have said that they will be sending Leopard 2 tanks to Kiev. But to do this, they need permission from Germany because these tanks were originally made in Germany. They cannot be re-exported without Berlin's permission. It holds a veto over them. And just why is Berlin refusing to give this permission? Because it thinks it has already done enough to support Ukraine and implies that the others have done far less, especially the United States, given American wealth and military prowess. Germany, for that matter, says America should send its own Abrams tanks, which are better equipped for the battlefield. America says that every country should make their own sovereign decisions, decisions that should not be based on what the others are doing. A bitter face-off has followed, and it's unlikely to end anytime soon. Meanwhile, Ukraine says it's running out of time, and they are paying for it with people's lives. This entire episode is tragic, to say the least. And it only highlights the kind of internal disagreements that have beset the corridors of power in the West. How the West may have succeeded the compassion test on Ukraine, but it may fail when it comes to dealing with the real challenges. The question is there an explanation for this change in the mood? Why are these divisions even emerging? And there are a host of reasons for this. To start with, this
is a NATO war, frankly, honestly.
Yesterday, in our cover story on Beyond Plus, we asked how long will the West continue to send arms to Ukraine? Tonight, let me tell you why this question is keeping Volodymyr Zelensky up at night. A new wave of assaults is looming large over Ukraine. The Russian president has already given his new commander his first task to take control of the Donbas region by March. But how do the Russian soldiers plan on doing that? The Donbas region is basically the eastern flank of Ukraine. There is no guarantee that the attacks will only be reserved for that area. Vladimir Putin declared that there is no doubt Russia will win this war. Experts are calling this Russia's spring assault. In the past few months, Russia has not been able to make any major breakthrough. But Ukraine is not naive to sit and wait. It has begun preparing. It is looking at its Western partners. And the weapon of interest is the Leopard 2 tank. So far, Ukraine has primarily relied on Soviet-era T-72 tanks. But this could be a game changer for Kiev. Germany's Leopard 2 tank is seen as one of West's best tanks. It weighs more than 60 tons, has a 120mm smooth-bore gun, and can hit targets at a distance of up to 5 kilometers. But Berlin has not shown the green light yet. The British Defense Secretary is in Estonia right now to make a final attempt to convince Germany. The meeting is being called the Leopard Coalition. There is pressure from Kiev, and there is pressure from fellow European capitals. It remains to be seen if Chancellor Olaf Scholz budgets after all. These battle tanks are a significant step up in support provided by the West. Even the NATO chief agrees that there needs to be a significant boost in arms for Ukraine. And that is the only way a peaceful solution could be negotiated.
This may be a pivotal moment in the war, and we need to understand that most likely this war will end at the negotiating table. Nobody knows exactly how the war will end, but most likely around negotiations or around the negotiating table. But what we do know is that the outcome of those negotiations will be totally dependent on the strength on the battlefield. So if we want Ukraine to prevail as an independent sovereign nation and a peaceful negotiated solution, more support for Ukraine is the way to peace, to a negotiated peace.
Jens Stoltenberg is calling it a pivotal moment. So the West is left with a small window to negotiate, agree, and send arms package to Kiev. While time is running out, Russia is busy holding military drills with its all-weather ally, Belarus. Despite a number of military defeats, the president seems confident with his plan. Today, he visited his native St. Petersburg. It's the 80th anniversary of Soviet forces breaking the siege of Leningrad. He took the opportunity to praise his defense industry and then defend his goals in Ukraine. Meanwhile, his foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, was busy making headlines, slamming the West. The high-level official likened the group's policies to Nazi leader Adolf Hitler's. He said, and I quote, "Just as Hitler mobilized and captured the majority of European countries and sent them against the Soviet Union, now the United States has organized a coalition against Russia." It has been 11 months since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The invasion quickly turned into a war when Ukraine stepped up. Until today, the country has held its doors because of help from the West. Today, Kiev is hopeful that the same backing will help defend itself from Russia's next assaults. For more on this, we are now joined by Maximilian Hess, a Russia-Ukraine analyst and an author. He joins us live from London. Thank you so much for speaking to WION. Now, NATO says it's important to continue supporting Ukraine as
you should not be in a situation like in California, where if you buck the medical establishment, if you dissent from conventional wisdom, then they can even take away your license to practice at all. No, in Florida, we want to protect people's ability to follow the evidence and to choose evidence over narrative. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of these institutions, including many medical institutions, become very politicized. When you started to see the forced masking of students by the American Academy of Pediatrics, that was never anything that people thought was okay. Then the teachers unions wanted it, and so they came out and said, you have to have all these rigid requirements. So I think Americans have seen a lot of these institutions behave very politically. They've indulged in partisanship. And when you go away from evidence-based medicine and you start embracing ideology, you start to do things that aren't in the public's interest. And so if you think about our medical establishment from Fauci on down over the last 3 years, you know, they were wrong about lockdowns. They were wrong about mask mandates. They were wrong about school closures. They were wrong about mRNA shots. They were wrong about vax passports and vax mandates, and really on and on it goes. And so the physicians that were speaking out against some of these things, they were really treated very poorly. So in Florida, we're going to make sure that those physicians are free to speak and free to offer their opinions, regardless of whatever may be in vogue politically or whatever some of the higher ups think is appropriate. And we're actually seeing that now on this issue that we've had to deal with about these sex change operations for these kids that they're doing. You know, that is something that is very much supported by a lot of medical elites in the United States. It's not supported by most of the European medical community because they're not necessarily partisan in their outlook. And Sweden, a lot of them have said, no, this is not good. There's not evidence for it. They've had, our Board of Medicine has issued a rule saying that you can lose your license if you do it for these kids. And we have many of the people that had this and have grown up and now regret it, and they're testifying in favor of what we're trying to do. But you see something like that, and that would not have happened 20 years ago because it was more about where the evidence was going. Now it seems to be more following ideology. So that's very, very dangerous. But we need those individual brave physicians willing to speak out and buck the narrative and be able to speak the truth. And so we're seeing all this stuff. And, Joe Ladapo is really, I think, the only one. Florida is still the only state that doesn't recommends against the mRNA shots for under 18. Actually, we recommend under 40 for males, right? Or under, yeah. When they came out with the baby jabs for the 6-month-old, Joe, we just said we're not doing it. So the health department has never had any of the baby jabs I think every other health department in the country is helping to pass out these jabs for 6-month-old, 8-month-old, 15-month-old babies, and there's no evidence backing up the need or the desirability to jab these kids. And so that's why what we're doing. But what he's doing is he's bucking the consensus, not a very well-founded consensus, but it is the consensus. Certainly it's what Big Pharma wants. And so that's why a lot of these practitioners fall on the line, but Joe Ladapo has been willing to stand and say, you know what, that's not justified based on the evidence. And so I think a lot of parents really appreciate that. They appreciate the freedom to choose, but they also appreciate honest analysis, and so that they can make these decisions that's best for their family. So we're really excited. Yes, absolutely. We're really excited to be able to make it very clear that we're continuing to lead the way. I think these permanent reforms are going to be a very, very good. People will be able to have great peace of mind, because, I used to tell people during the election, I said, you have the CDC adding the COVID jabs for the childhood immunization schedule. People are going to use that around this country to justify mandates. You watch, it's going to happen. And I said, you don't have to worry about that as long as I'm around. And so we had it. So we're now being able to make good. We obviously did that. We've prevented it in Florida, but now it'll be a permanent feature of our law. And so I'm really excited about what we're going to be able to do and what we're going to be able to accomplish. And we're going to continue to lead the way on all these different issues. I'm also really happy to be joined by, as I mentioned, our Surgeon General, Dr. Joseph Ladapo is here. We have from the Dermatology Specialist of Florida, Dr. John Ward is here. We have Deidre Long, who's going to talk about healthcare and how they treated the shots for the employees, and she's going to explain her ordeal. We have Lauren Phillips, a mother that's enrolled, that has children enrolled in private school, and can talk about some of these issues. And then Dr. Tim Boyette, radiologist here from the Panhandle. We really appreciate it. The thing is, one of the things, I think part of it was medical freedom, but when COVID came, it was like the medical authorities did not want to look at treatment of it. They were saying, okay, wear a mask, don't leave your house, this, that.